You and I are standing this very second at the meeting place of two eternities, the vast past that has endured forever, and the future that is plunging on to the last syllable of recorded time. We can't possibly live in either of those eternities, no, not even for one split second. But, by trying to do so, we can wreck both our bodies and our minds. So let's be content to live the only time we can possibly live, from now until bedtime. Anyone can carry his burden, however hard, until nightfall, wrote Robert Louis Stevenson. Anyone can do his work, however hard, for one day. Anyone can live sweetly, patiently, lovingly, purely, till the sun goes down. And this is all that life really means. Yes, that is all that life requires of us, but Mrs. E.K. Shields, 815 Court Street, Saginaw, Michigan, was driven to despair, even to the brink of suicide, before she learned to live just till bedtime. In 1937, I lost my husband, Mrs. Shields said as she told me her story. I was very depressed, and almost penniless. I wrote my former employer, Mr. Leon Roach, of the Roach-Fowler Company of Kansas City, and got my old job back. I had formerly made my living selling books to rural and town school boards. I had sold my car 2 years previously when my husband became ill, but I managed to scrape together enough money to put a down payment on a used car and started out to sell books again. I had thought that getting back on the road would help relieve my depression, but driving alone and eating alone was almost more than I could take. Some of the territory was not very productive, and I found it hard to make those car payments, small as they were. In the spring of 1938, I was working out from Versailles, Missouri. The schools were poor, the roads bad. I was so lonely and discouraged that at one time I even considered suicide. It seemed that success was impossible. I had nothing to live for. I dreaded getting up each morning and facing life. I was afraid of everything, afraid I could not meet the car payments, afraid I could not pay my room rent, afraid I would not have enough to eat. I was afraid my health was failing and I had no money for a doctor. All that kept me from suicide were the thoughts that my sister would be deeply grieved, and that I did not have enough money to pay my funeral expenses. Then one day I read an article that lifted me out of my despondence and gave me the courage to go on living. I shall never cease to be grateful for one inspiring sentence in that article. It said, "Every day is a new life to a wise man." I typed that sentence out and pasted it on the windshield of my car, where I saw it every minute I was driving. I found it wasn't so hard to live only one day at a time. I learned to forget the yesterdays and to not think of the tomorrows. Each morning I said to myself, today is a new life. I have succeeded in overcoming my fear of loneliness, my fear of want. I am happy and fairly successful now and have a lot of enthusiasm and love for life. I know now that I shall never again be afraid, regardless of what life hands me. I know now that I don't have to fear the future. I know now that I can live one day at a time, and that every day is a new life to a wise man. Who do you suppose wrote this verse? Happy the man, and happy he alone, he who, secure within, can say, "Tomorrow, do thy worst, for I have lived today." Those words sound modern, don't they? Yet they were written 30 years before Christ was born, by the Roman poet Horace. One of the most tragic things I know about human nature is that all of us tend to put off living. We are all dreaming of some magical rose garden over the horizon, instead of enjoying the roses that are blooming outside our windows today. Why are we such fools, such tragic fools? How strange it is, our little procession of life, I wrote Stephen Leacock. The child says, when I am a big boy. But what is that? The big boy says, when I grow up. And then, grown up, he says, when I get married. But to be married, what is that after all? The thought changes to when I'm able to retire. And then, when retirement comes, he looks back over the landscape traversed, a cold wind seems to sweep over it, somehow he has missed it all, and it is gone. Life, we learn too late, is in the living, in the tissue of every day and hour. The late Edward S. Evans of Detroit almost killed himself with worry before he learned that life is in the living, in the tissue of every day and hour. Brought up in poverty, Edward Evans made his first money by selling newspapers, then worked as a grocer's clerk. Later, with 7 people dependent upon him for bread and butter, he got a job as an assistant librarian. Small as the pay was, he was afraid to quit. 8 years passed before he could summon up the courage to start out on his own. But once he started, he built up an original investment of $55 borrowed dollars into a business of his own that made him $20,000 a year. Then came a frost, a killing frost. He endorsed a big note for a friend, and the friend went bankrupt. Quickly on top of that disaster came another. The bank in which he had all his money collapsed. He not only lost every cent he had, but was plunged into debt for $16,000. His nerves couldn't take it. I couldn't sleep or eat, he told me. I became strangely ill. Worry and nothing but worry, he said, brought on this illness. One day as I was walking down the street, I fainted and fell on the sidewalk. I was no longer able to walk. I was put to bed and my body broke out in boils. These boils turned inward until just lying in bed was agony. I grew weaker every day. Finally, my doctor told me that I had only 2 more weeks to live. I was shocked. I drew up my will, and then lay back in bed to await my end. No use now to struggle or worry. I gave up, relaxed, and went to sleep. I hadn't slept 2 hours in succession for weeks, but now with my earthly problems drawing to an end, I slept like a baby. My exhausting weariness began to disappear. My appetite returned. I gained weight. A few weeks later, I was able to walk with crutches. 6 weeks later, I was able to go back to work. I had been making $20,000 a year, but I was glad now to get a job for $30 a week. I got a job selling blocks to put behind the wheels of automobiles when they are shipped by freight. I had learned my lesson now. No more worry for me, no more regret about what had happened in the past, no more dread of the future. I concentrated all my time, energy, and enthusiasm into selling those blocks. Edward S. Evans shot up fast now. In a few years, he was president of the company. His company, the Evans Product Company, has been listed on the New York Stock Exchange for years. When Edward S. Evans died in 1945, he was one of the most progressive businessmen in the United States. If you ever fly over Greenland, you may land on. Here is the point of the story: Edward S. Evans would never have had the thrill of achieving these victories in business and in living if he hadn't seen the folly of worrying, if he hadn't learned to live in daytight compartments. 500 years before Christ was born, the Greek philosopher Heraclitus told his students that everything changes except the law of change. He said, "You cannot step in the same river twice. The river changes every second, and so does the man who stepped in it. Life is a ceaseless change. The only certainty is today." Why mar the beauty of living today by trying to solve the problems of a future that is shrouded in ceaseless change and uncertainty, a future that no one can possibly foretell? The old Romans had a word for it. In fact, they had 2 words for it. Carpe diem. Enjoy the day. Or, seize the day. Yes, seize the day, and make the most of it. That is the philosophy of Lowell Thomas. I recently spent a weekend at his farm, and I noticed that he had these words from Psalm 6:vi framed and hanging on the walls of his broadcasting studio where he would see them often. "This is the day which the Lord hath made, we will rejoice and be glad in it." John Ruskin had on his desk a simple piece of stone on which was carved one word, today. And while I haven't a piece of stone on my desk, I do have a poem pasted on my mirror where I can see it when I shave every morning, a poem that Sir William Osier always kept on his desk, a poem written by the famous Indian dramatist, Kalidasa. Salutation to the dawn. Look to this day. For it is life, the very life of life. In its brief course lie all the verities and realities of your existence, the bliss of growth, the glory of action, the splendor of achievement. For yesterday is but a dream, and tomorrow is only a vision. But today well lived makes yesterday a dream of happiness, and every tomorrow a vision of hope. Look well, therefore, to this day. Such is the salutation to the dawn. So, the first thing you should know about worry is this: if you want to keep it out of your life, do what Sir William Osier did. Shut the iron doors on the past and the future. Live in daytight compartments. Why not ask yourself these questions, and write down the answers? 1. Do I tend to put off living in the present in order to worry about the future, or to yearn for some magical rose garden over the horizon? 2. Do I sometimes embitter the present by regretting things that happened in the past, that are over and done with? 3. Do I get up in the morning determined to seize the day, to get the utmost out of these 24 hours? 4. Can I get more out of life by living in daytight compartments? 5. When shall I start to do this? Next week? Tomorrow? Today?